Welcome back to CBSN. I'm Elaine Quijano, and this is our continuing coverage of tonight's GOP debate. I'm joined here on set in New York by Rick Davis, CBSN political contributor and former John McCain campaign manager, as well as Nick Thompson, CBS News contributor and editor for TheNewYorker.com. And in New Hampshire, in the spin room, we have CBS News senior political editor getting ready to go there, Steve Chaggaris, who clearly can't hear me right now, but we're going to join him in just a moment. Let's start off at the beginning of this debate. There he is. Hi, Steve. Let's start off at the beginning when Marco Rubio and Christie really produced, I think, some of the most heated exchanges throughout the night that we have heard, primarily over the question of Marco Rubio's experience. Here's just one of those exchanges.
I like Marco Rubio, and he's a smart person and a good guy, but he simply does not have the experience to be president of the United States and make these decisions. We've watched it happen, everybody. For the last 7 years, the people of New Hampshire are smart. Do not make the same mistake again.
I think the experience is not just what you did, but how it worked out. Under Christie's governorship of New Jersey, they've been downgraded 9 times in their credit rating. This country already has a debt problem. We don't need to add to it by electing someone who has experience at running up and destroying the credit rating of his state. But I would add this: let's dispel with this fiction that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. He is trying to change this country. He wants America to become more like the rest of the world. We don't want to be like the rest of the world. We want to be the United States of America. And when I'm elected president, this will become, once again, the single greatest nation in the history of the world, not the disaster Barack Obama has imposed upon us.
You see, everybody, I want the people at home to think about this. That's what Washington, D.C. does. The drive-by shot at the beginning with incorrect and incomplete information, and then the memorized 25-second speech that is exactly what his advisors gave him. See, Marco, the thing is this. When you're president of the United States, when you're a governor of a state, the memorized 30-second speech where you talk about how great America is at the end of it doesn't solve one problem for one person. They expect you to plow the snow. They expect you to get the schools open. And when the worst natural disaster in your state's history hits you, they expect you to rebuild their state, which is what I've done. None of that stuff happens on the floor of the United States Senate. It's a fine job. I'm glad you ran for it, but it does not prepare you for president of the United States.
Chris, your state got hit by a massive snowstorm 2 weeks ago. You didn't even want to go back. They had to shame you into going back. And then you stayed there for 36 hours, and then he left and came back to campaign. See, those are the facts. Here's the bottom line. This notion that Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing is just not true.
There it is.
He knows exactly what he's doing.
The memorized 25-second speech.
Well, that's the reason why this campaign.
You know what the shame is, Marco? The shame is that you would actually criticize somebody for showing up to work, plowing the streets, getting the trains run back on time, when you've never been responsible for that in your entire life.
Okay. He didn't want to go back.
And the fact is, I went back, it got done, and here's something.
You didn't want to go back.
I went back. Oh, so wait a second. Is that one of the skills you get as a United States Senator, ESP also?
Chris, everybody, you said you weren't going to go back.
The fact is, Marco,
he told everyone he wasn't going to go back, and they had to shame him into going back.
Marco, because...
And then when he decided to go back, he criticized the young lady, saying, what am I supposed to do, go back with a mop?
By the way,
clean up the flooding?
It gets very unruly when he gets off his talking
Thank you, Governor. I will mention you.
Okay, so Rick, I'm going to start with you on that. I mean, that was fiery, to say the least, but there was an interesting crossing of the line in terms of revealing a playbook tactic. That's not something you see, and it seemed to hit Marco Rubio a little bit off guard there.
Yeah, I think it totally took him off his game. Mm-hmm. I think it took him half a debate to recover from that. Yeah. It was really well done on the part of Christie. I think this is definitely Christie's best debate, and he may be, the de facto winner of this debate just because of that exchange. And what it did was it sort of ripped the pretense, the veneer off of Rubio, who's been just cruising through these debates by doing exactly that 25-second speech they do in Washington. And when he did it and got called on it, it was as if he couldn't even respond to that. And then he did it again.
Yeah. Nick, let me ask you, I mean, that was definitely a moment that is going to be, and has been, in fact, replayed over and over. It's funny, on Twitter, there's actually now an account at Rubio Glitch, Marco Rubio Glitch. I mean, this is certainly was not Marco Rubio's best moment. I guess the question is, though, the reality of the situation for Chris Christie is he's in the single digits when you look at the polls. So realistically, what could the effect possibly be here?
Well, this is exactly what Chris Christie had hoped for. But remember, the best case scenario for Chris Christie is much worse than the worst case scenario for Marco Rubio. I mean, Chris Christie is not going to come close to catching Marco Rubio no matter what happens in New Hampshire. And also, by the way, we have the Super Bowl tomorrow, so Marco Rubio is really happy about that. He would like everybody to please focus on the Super Bowl. Please go buy your beer right now, and let's forget about the debate. So Chris Christie is not going to rise that much, but he absolutely exposed Marco Rubio. We're going to be replaying this, and as we replay it, we're going to be thinking about the fact that Marco Rubio has no record in the Senate, is robotic, and got hammered on stage by Christie. Every element of this skewering is bad for Rubio.
All right, let's go. Is our Steve Chaggaris ready for us in New Hampshire? I want to get your take, Steve, CBS News senior political editor. Steve Chaggaris, we've been talking about this moment here where Chris Christie absolutely hammered Marco Rubio on this notion of repeating a canned answer. It seemed to be a very effective strategy there.
Yeah, what Christie did is he painted a caricature of Marco Rubio, and Rubio was unable to douse that. And so now what we're going to see is all his opponents, whether Democrats or Republicans, talking about two things. One, that he couldn't answer the question about what he has accomplished in his career, and secondly, that he's just got these canned answers to try to pivot from answering questions in debates. And so it's a caricature now. It's going to be on Saturday Night Live. I guarantee you the late night show is going to pick up on this. This is the kind of thing that Sarah Palin had trouble with, the kinds of thing that Rick Perry had trouble with in 2012. I don't know if it's going to be as damaging to Rubio, but I'm telling you, this is fodder for the comedy show hosts, and it's going to be fodder for his opponents, and it's just not going to go away. He was unable to answer Chris Christie on this. So you got to give Christie some credit for basically creating a caricature of Marco Rubio.
One of the other interesting dynamics on the stage tonight was Senator Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. At one point, Senator Cruz was asked whether he felt Donald Trump had the temperament to be president. Let's listen to that.
Senator Cruz, I did ask about Mr. Trump. You said he doesn't have the temperament to be commander-in-chief. Do you stand by those words?
I think that is an assessment the voters are going to make, and they're going to make it of each and every one of us. They are going to assess who is level-headed, who has clear vision, who has judgment, who can confront our enemies, who can confront the threats we face in this country, and who can have the judgment when to engage and when not to engage. Both are incredibly important for a commander-in-chief, knowing how to go after our enemies. In the case of Iran, for example, who has the clarity of vision to understand that the Ayatollah Khamenei, when he chants death to America, he means it. We need a president with the judgment and resolve to keep this country safe from radical Islamic terrorism.
Senator Cruz, thank you. We're going to continue on this notion of readiness and experience.
Am I allowed to respond? I have to respond.
If you'd like to respond, Mr. Trump.
First of all, I respect what Ted just said. But if you noticed, he didn't answer your question. And that's what's going to happen. It's okay. That's what's going to happen with our enemies and the people we compete against. We're going to win with Trump. We're going to win. We don't win anymore. Our country doesn't win anymore. We're going to win with Trump. And people back down with Trump. And that's what I like, and that's what the country is going to like.
All right, let's turn now to our Leslie Sanchez, CBSN political contributor and Republican strategist. Leslie, what did you make of that exchange?
You know, it's really interesting. There's a certain brand, kind of this boorish style of Donald Trump. And in many ways in this debate, he was like a hot air balloon that's slowly losing altitude. I think when you compared it in contrast to two things, some very strong governors who were able to point to very measured approaches they could take that had been successful, as opposed to a lot of hot air. And also when he was tethered to some of his things, not only in that exchange with Senator Cruz, but also with Jeb Bush on Eminent Domain, it was really a very nice opportunity. It was a positive for the governors, at least, to show somebody with substance versus style. And it's going to be the voters' choice, but ultimately that's what's been missing in these debates, and this is the first time it's really getting there.
Yeah, you mentioned that that exchange about eminent domain, and for some of our viewers who might not have heard it, let's go ahead and play that right now. This was between Jeb Bush and Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Eminent domain is an absolute necessity for a country, for our country. Without it, you wouldn't have roads, you wouldn't have hospitals, you wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't have schools, you wouldn't have bridges. You need eminent domain. And a lot of the big conservatives that tell me how conservative they are, I think I'm more than they are, they tell me, oh, Well, they all want the Keystone Pipeline. The Keystone Pipeline, without eminent domain, it wouldn't go 10 feet.
But what Donald Trump did was use eminent domain to try to take the property of an elderly woman on the Strip in Atlantic City. That is not public purpose. That is downright wrong. And here's the problem with that.
All right, okay.
The problem was it was to tear down. It was to
Jeb
tear
wants
down.
to be. He wants to be a tough guy. He
Down,
wants to be a tough guy
it
tonight.
was to tear down
I didn't
the
take
house,
the property.
and the net result was you tried.
I didn't
and
take
you
the
lost
property.
in the court.
The woman ultimately didn't want to do that. I
That is not
away,
true.
And
the
it was
simple
great that
fact
I
is,
didn't.
to turn this into a limousine parking lot for his casinos is not a public use.
A lot of times you'll have, and it doesn't work very well with
How
that.
tough is it
a
to
lot
take
of
a
times,
property from an elderly woman?
Let me talk. Quiet.
How tough
a lot
is
of
it?
times, a lot of times. That's all of his donors and special interests out there. So that's what it is. That's what. And by the way, let me just tell you, we needed tickets. You can't get them. You know who has the tickets for the? I'm talking about to the television audience. Donors, special interest, the people that are putting up the money. So it is. The RNC told us we have all donors in the audience, and the reason they're not loving me, the reason they're not loving me is I don't want their money. I'm going to do the right thing for the American public. I don't want their money. I don't need their money. And I'm the only one up here that can say that. Eminent domain, the Keystone Pipeline, do you consider that a private job?
I consider it a public use.
No, let me ask you, Jeb. Do you consider the Keystone Pipeline private? Is it public or private?
It's a public use.
Oh, really? A public use? No,
Yeah.
it's a private job.
It's a public use.
It's a private job.
Established by the courts, federal, state
You
courts.
wouldn't have the Keystone Pipeline that you want so badly without eminent domain.
All right, gentlemen,
you
I
wouldn't
agree.
have massive, excuse me, Josh, you wouldn't have massive factories without eminent domain.
Okay, Leslie, you brought it up. What did you make of that?
You know, it's interesting, especially for a state like New Hampshire, and well, especially among conservatives. This issue of eminent domain goes back. It is really a sore spot, and it is a hyper vigilant community that watches this issue of government intrusion and overreaching of government. I think it was really in the sweet spot, to use a term we heard tonight, of Governor Jeb Bush. He very much was able to put in contrast that it looked like Donald Trump was somebody who benefited personally, as opposed to really protecting the rights and the landowner rights, and maybe of individuals who were not able to negotiate as much. You know, Donald Trump talked about, if they're smart, they got twice their value, market value for their homes. Either way, I think people on the other side going, no, I really don't want to sell my home. I would like to have the opportunity to choose. So whether it's a false argument or not, I think it sounded stronger. It's probably one of the highlights for Jeb Bush.
At the same time, Steve, let me turn to you. When we saw on the split screen there, when Donald Trump shushed Jeb Bush, was sort of a smiling, nodding Jeb Bush that didn't necessarily push back in any way, shape, or form as Donald Trump continued on with his argument. What about sort of the optics of that exchange?
Well, as I mentioned before, it's just a sort of a repeat of when Jeb Bush and Trump have gotten into it at debates, where it seems that Jeb will start out aggressive toward Trump, and then Trump says something or does something, or there's just a moment where Trump then takes over, and it's a machine gun out of Trump's mouth at that point, and sort of just shuts Jeb up. And I don't know. I mean, I wonder if the backing down, Jeb's backing down, has had an effect on his numbers. I don't know if, there's a lot of, Jeb Bush has had a lot of problems as a candidate, but I think standing there on a stage on national TV and just sort of backing down almost every time that Donald Trump sort of gets out there, it's just sort of, it just happened again. But I did think Rick made a point earlier that I'm going to steal, if you don't mind, which is, it's interesting because I think in this situation where Jeb Bush may have made a very good point in the broader sense of conservatives and the Republican Party, it's unclear how this will hurt Trump among the people who are already backing him. This is a classic example of how Trump sort of digs in his heels, people who are supporting Trump like his toughness, like the fact that he stood up to Jeb Bush. Now, on the overall issue, it might not get him any more people within the party, but it's hard to see how he loses support from the people who are already backing him just because they are attracted to the way that Trump acts in a situation like this.
Yeah. Nick, you want to jump in?
Well, I wanted to jump in on the first exchange. I agree with Leslie's analysis. The second exchange, I agree with everything about Jeb and Trump. But on that first exchange between Trump and Cruz, I actually thought Trump smoked him, right? Because Cruz goes out there and says, you need to have judgment, you need to be a leader, you have to have nuance. And then he gives the most unnuanced answer possible about Iran, like an incredibly complicated diplomatic issue. And he just has a very simple, crude way of talking about it. And then Trump comes on, and I thought Trump really dominated that exchange. I thought Trump messed up all sorts of things through the debate. But I did think he had that very strong moment.
Well, he was able in that moment to get back to his core philosophy, which is winning.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm a winner, and you're going to be a winner if I'm a winner, and the country's going to be a winner. And this is his ideology, right? He is an ideological winner. He's not a conservative, he's not a moderate, he's not a liberal. He doesn't connect him with any issue group. Eminent Domain's a classic example. He said, even in that exchange, all these conservatives tell him I'm crazy, but I'm telling you, you got to have that parking lot. I would say there's an interesting aspect of that Eminent Domain exchange, too, that was left out at the end, and that was he went after the audience as a bunch of donors, and I don't need you, and I'm different because I don't need that money. One of the things that really concerns me as someone who has had to run a budget for a presidential campaign, these things are expensive, right? It's going to cost more than $1 billion to run a general election campaign if Donald Trump becomes the nominee. What's he going to do? Write a check? I don't think so. All those donors that he just criticized, he's going to have to go to them as the Republican nominee and saying, hey, I need your help now. And you know what they're going to say? Look at how you treated us in that New Hampshire debate. Oh, by the way, look how you treated us in that Iowa debate. Oh, by the way, so I mean, it's going to wear thin on him, this act. And I'm just worried over time. He may be getting some cheap political thrills today, but that check is going to come due at some point in his campaign.
I think if he runs in the general, he's going to have a lot bigger problems than fundraising. I mean, this is a guy who, according to the Times analysis today, has actually made more money selling hats than his campaign has cost so far. So I kind of think, your point is exactly right. But
I don't think there's enough hats in the world to get you through a presidential campaign. So I'm not sure that's a good trade. But I do think from a serious perspective, it's really great to have this kind of notion. There are very few people who can actually write that check who want to be president, and he's not one of them.
Yeah. So speaking of winners, you were talking about winners a moment ago. The actual winner of the Iowa caucus on the Republican side, Ted Cruz, was asked about what the Ben Carson campaign believes were some shenanigans in the lead up to the caucuses. Let's listen to that.
Ben is a good and honorable man, and Ben and Candy have become friends. He has an amazing life story that has inspired millions, including me. When this transpired, I apologized to him then, and I do so now. Ben, I'm sorry. On Monday night, about 6:30 p.m., CNN reported that Ben was not going from Iowa to New Hampshire or South Carolina. Rather, he was, quote, taking a break from campaigning. My political team saw CNN's report, breaking news, and they forwarded that news to our volunteers. It was being covered on live television. A couple hours later, I found out about it. I was told that Ben was unhappy. I called him that evening because I respect him very, very highly. I didn't reach him that evening. I reached him the next day and apologized. He asked me then, he said, Ted, would you make this apology in public? I said, yes, I will. And I did so. I regret that subsequently CNN reported on that. They didn't correct that story until 9:15 that night. So from 6:30 p.m. to 9:15, that's what CNN was reporting. Subsequent to that initial report, Ben's campaign put out a statement saying that he was not suspending his campaign. I wish that our campaign staff had forwarded that statement. They were unaware of it. I wish that they had. That's why I apologized.
Since I was mentioned.
Dr. Carson, please.
This is great. You guys, I want you to all mention me when you say something. In fact, the timeline indicates that initial tweet from CNN was followed by another one within 1 minute that clarified that I was not dropping out. We can see what happened. Everybody can see what happened, and you can make your own judgment.
Dr. Carson,
based on
thank
that.
you.
All right, Steve Chaggaris, what did you make of that? Certainly, there was a lot of explaining on the part of Senator Cruz about what happened in Iowa.
A lot of explaining, and clearly Carson was not convinced, and basically just said, look, you can say all you want about this wasn't a dirty trick, but I'm telling you, the timeline shows that you should have known that what you were telling your supporters and you were telling people in Iowa was not factually correct in terms of what the news was, and that you misled people at best. And Carson just he's been irritated by this since Monday night. And it doesn't seem like that he's any less irritated about it now. I thought this was one of the two moments. You played the last Cruz-Trump moment too. I think these were two moments that Cruz didn't do very well tonight. I think he didn't look so honest in this back and forth, and up against Ben Carson, who by all accounts it seems that Republican voters, if nothing else, really like Ben Carson. They may not be supporting him, but he has very high favorables among Republicans. And so this is sort of a moment where Cruz just came across, I think, looking a little oily and didn't really explain himself very well, and Carson didn't seem to accept his explanation. So that was one. And then in the Trump versus Cruz part of it, it was an opportunity for Cruz to really go after Trump, and he didn't take the bait. He sort of danced around the question, which is different than what Cruz has been doing. He won Iowa. I think one of the reasons why is because he went hard after Donald Trump before the Iowa caucuses, and it just seems like he backed off on it here. And I'm wondering what the strategy is there with Cruz, is sort of letting off the gas in terms of the criticism of Trump.
Leslie, I want to turn to you and ask you about this lingering, it appears to be lingering ill will here on the part of Dr. Ben Carson towards the Cruz campaign for what happened. Is there the potential there for Ted Cruz to be hurt by that?
That's what the interesting part. I think all week long, and I'm going to, again, take a line from Rick, we were talked about a zero-sum game where Dr. Carson loses support. Where's it going to go? It looks like Ted Cruz is the biggest benefactor. And so he's trying to be careful. I think what the unctuousness of this whole thing is that the dirty trick worked. I mean, the bottom line is that's I think why Dr. Carson is in the right here. Once he put it out there, it already started to have the effect that this is not going to be a sustainable campaign, and he starts to ingratiate himself more with a lot of these supporters. He did the deed and is already benefiting. So you can apologize all you want. It was strategically, from a tactician standpoint, it was extremely effective. And I think there's going to be some sour grapes about that. And I would almost argue that Senator Cruz is looking ahead to South Carolina, where you have, again, that big evangelical support. Where are they going to go? Are they seeing kind of in the tea leaves, Dr. Carson's really not a long-termer? It was a very shrewd move, and it may pay off for that reason.